everybody being here today for just this event. But again, we have another wonderful speaker. Mr. Ray Moses is with us this afternoon, and he's going to teach us about some wonderful things. And I think it's, like he said, it's going to go beyond gardening. So, but just another, I guess, very good topic to have when we're trying to prepare for emergencies. And hopefully we don't ever have to be faced with those circumstances, but it's always good to be ready and be prepared. So thank you so much for being with us today.
All right, well, she says I'm a great speaker, but I don't think she's ever heard me talk before. Jay asked me out of the blue if I'd come and talk. I'm a farmer here in Livingston County. I was born here. I have a beef cattle and commercial hay operation, and so I'm well familiar with risk. A lot of farming and the rural lifestyle is being prepared ahead of time for risk. Okay, so the way we start is we have a business plan, right? And one thing I learned about that, you put something down on paper, you're going to start another enterprise. It could be some sort of food producing enterprise or forestry enterprise, livestock, whatever. Nothing ever looks as good. Nothing will ever turn out as good as it looks on paper. Never, okay? And that could go for justification for purchasing a new piece of equipment. You say, well, this has got to pay off. And nobody can ever predict. You're part of the environment, and you're trying not to become an environmental casualty, okay? Because that's what you are as when you're involved in agriculture, and I guess I'll just say the rural lifestyle, or people living out in the country. If you're trying to be a little bit more independent, make some income off your land, or you actually are a farmer, okay? You are always trying to mitigate risk, and that starts with that business plan, that financial plan, okay? And always go on the conservative side of what you really think your income can be, because it just never, I'm telling you, never will pan out anywhere close to what you think you're going to make, okay? I do numbers all the time, okay? And it's really important for smaller farmers like myself, okay? We don't have a lot of bank account money. We're usually not a big, we're usually, people like me are not in a government program, where we got some type of fail-safe. Right now the current fail-safe is government-backed crop insurance. Okay, so somebody like me doesn't have any of that. So if you want to know about numbers and risk, I am all about that, okay? So you always are running numbers, and you try to say, what can I generate potentially? And then take 50% off that and see if you still think you could make an income at the end of the year. Because somebody like me cannot have a year where I lose money. Okay, there's no off-farm income. Okay, there's no off-farm. Okay, so beyond that, let's talk about obvious. We're going to go into obvious and then things you aren't so obvious that are risks that are presenting landowners, farmers, land managers, and the like. Obvious is just your natural disasters, okay? A lot of that could be mitigated by proper site planning. Don't build on a floodplain. If you look at all the old farmsteads, all the old houses, they're all built on the highest spot around, even if it's relatively flat ground here in Livingston County. Okay, because now you see newer homes built, you see when they dig a basement, it's all filled with water before they ever, before they're doing the foundation. It's built with a sump pump the whole time. That, in the old days, farmers, and this is back when nobody even had insurance in the 1800s, where there wasn't much of that, they really had to plan ahead. Man, nobody was building on a floodplain or in a swamp, So how about your barn, though? I had a client this year, their barn was taken out, last year we had those two big storms come through central, southern, southwestern Livingston County. Barn has these giant cottonwoods, 100 foot tall like this. One right on the barn, okay? Don't build, when I'm running a new fence line, I graze cattle on a lot of acreage, a lot of leased acreage, and I'm bushwhacking through the brush, stretching wire. ahead of time, there's a big dead elm tree there, cut it down now. That's part of that's how I think. I'm always thinking of risk because I don't want to call in the middle of the night, hey, cattle are down on M59 because a tree fell in a windstorm. I'm always thinking of this, okay? And then, obviously with that, if you're gonna, how many tried to say, hey, I'm gonna grow a garden to produce my own food? The best laid plans are deer getting it, raccoons, set up something ahead of time. Okay? My hat's off to people that can make a living selling vegetables and fruits. Hard. You got to really be a farmer to do that. I mean, that's hard. But let's talk about the biggie, insurance. Okay? Don't rely on that your homeowner's insurance is covering your farm enterprise. I'm surprised how many people are not properly insured. If you go in to get a policy, don't go in and if your agents love to do this, bring me your old policy, let me look through it. Like, no, write me one. And that means several calls to your underwriters. If you don't ask enough questions, then your agent should be like, well, I'm not sure, let me call the underwriter. That's the type of agent you want, okay? Insurance is your best risk protection. Because if you don't have that, you will, got an example, buddy of mine, another small farmer, he decided to go to work early, this is just a month ago, had a bunch of hay down, convinced and taught his girlfriend, who was very timid about it, to run the round baler all in the same day. She calls him, he's on his way to work in Detroit, he's almost to work, she says, the round baler's on fire. She's bailing along and she looks behind, she goes, I think that's smoke. Gets out, she goes, calls him, he goes, there's a fire extinguisher, in the round baler. Gets out, fire extinguisher, puts it out, fire comes right back up, runs out, calls a neighbor, they get there, ends up, his fire extinguisher doesn't work, fire department gets there. Well, here's the deal, here's inflation, right? Big risk. He bought that round baler last year used for $6,000. He stole it. Okay, it's about a 10-year-old round baler. He bought it with 20,000 bales through it. I said, did you put on your deck sheet with your insurance agent that you paid $6,000 for it? Because now we were looking online, these things were like $25,000 for the same exact baler used. That's how much inflation's driven up used equipment, or just the lack of equipment sales, everybody holding on to stuff longer. He didn't have enough money to go buy a $25,000 baler. He goes, I can't remember. He goes, I know this spring I told my insurance agent I had it. If you don't put that stuff on your policy, not covered. We had a person in Farm Bureau in Monroe County a couple years ago, bought a brand new combine, started using it in the fall. It wasn't new, it was used. Didn't call his insurance agent, caught on fire. Declined coverage. Well, anyways, this worked out okay. This guy luckily didn't put it on his deck sheet, that it was what he paid for it. I got everything on mine, what I paid. And now to replace it would be a lot more. But that's the thing about insurance. Do you have replacement value? Do you have blanket coverage for fire? If you have a stored crop, is that covered? You need to go all, Another thing, you need to say what land you're farming. I talked to a guy, and it's kind of similar in each state. I talked to a guy that was ranching in western South Dakota. He had 200 cow-calf pairs they put out on leased property, remote pasture, which is common out there, where you don't see the cattle for a couple weeks. Showed up, all the cattle gone. He had them insured. Insurance company tried to deny coverage. Ended up in federal court, but one of the things they said was because he hadn't declared the location where he'd moved those cattle. So they tried to say he did, I think he ended up getting paid out in the long run, but for some reason ended up in federal court. So insurance, site planning is a biggie, okay? Now planning, well, how about inventory? I plan for a drought every year. Like I said, plan for worst case scenarios, right? Like you guys heard the old timers say, hay up and extra hay in the barn is money in the bank. Everybody's always like, yeah, keep extra. Nothing, you know, you do not have to have it all sold by spring. Okay? So plan your inventory. We saw during the COVID pandemic, a lot of people couldn't get parts and supplies, right? So part of your risk is always having extra supplies on at hand. You know, we're not really in a rural area anymore, so we got a lot of stores. Like we were starting to, last week and a half ago, we had that 9-10 day stretch. We've been really behind on hay. I laid down, we had in a 3-day period 140 acres of hay that I had laid down. So we're going nonstop. You expect stuff to break down, you're running equipment that hard, that long for that many days. We're getting ready to bale, and I see, oh, chain's about ready to break. Here, I was able to drive 5 minutes to Rural King, buy a new chain. You know, in a half hour, me and my hired guy, we had that on and going. But if you lived really in a rural area, you know, you'd have to have those parts. You know, and some of you might have property in a more rural area, you know. So we're kind of lucky here. There is a big advantage to being where you can get supplies, but having things on hand is important as far as your risk, right? Like I have things that I can't get locally, I have on hand. Certain parts for the tractors. I've been going through a field and ran into a great big hole and bent a tie rod. You know, you're gonna, Sunday afternoon, you're not getting that anywhere. So do I have that? You know, I'll have stuff like that in the parts bin, okay? So those are really important. Now let's get into some not, what I call kind of not obvious risk that is becoming more apparent if you're into the rural lifestyle. If you have property, somebody wants it. If you have resources, they want it, okay? I lease a lot of property. I manage a lot of land. You commonly will run into, if it's not a government agency that wants it, you will run into neighbors that are curious about what you're doing, okay? So some of these risks, like I'll give you a scenario, is that you're running, I thought it would be neighborly when you're putting up fencing to kind of go meet the landowner next door, right? And problem is with that, they may say, well, I really don't want the electric fence this close to my property. I want you to put it 50 yards out there. Well, I'm paying for the land, right? Am I going to do that? No. Then they're pissed at me. So I'm like, wow, and then will they call like regulatory agencies on you to make up stories? I've had that happen. Especially when you got livestock, okay? I've got a 130-acre piece that is completely non-tillable, isolated, old abandoned gravel pit I graze cattle on. I've been doing it for years. Somebody calls township planning department, says, I'm putting in a CAFO. What is that? Combined animal feed lot. 1,000-head facility has to be state licensed. Okay. Now here's the deal. Here's what you're running into. Government agencies are very likely to take the side of the complainant and write you a nasty letter demanding action immediately, even when there's no merit. Got a small group of cattle. I'm well within the confines of the Right to Farm Act. I mean, well within that. So here's where you have to know your laws and your legality. And this is how you respond, because if you don't respond right to local authorities, it can invite a whole host of problems that take away your freedom. You know, here, ironically, the landowner's an attorney. He gets the letter. And it's with no merit. It's ridiculous. He says, well, how many cattle should we tell them we're running on the property? So that's none of their business. You don't tell them how many. You don't give up numbers, right? Any of you that were just in DeBall's class on armed self-defense and the laws on deadly use of self-defense, you talk about not a good idea to give numbers and things like that. I said, just respond back saying we're farming well within the, the rights of the Right to Farm Act. Within what GAMS, General Accepted Agricultural Management Practices are. And that's it. Don't invite people on your property for that. Okay, because agriculture there's a narrative, even though everybody actually eats food, that agriculture is a contributor to the degeneration of society, environment, you name it, okay? So the legal issues are things that really can hurt your farm so you do have to protect yourself there. It doesn't, by any means, not be neighborly or friendly, okay? One of your risk protection would be, for example, sometimes you may be out checking your property and there is somebody on your property. They're looking for their lost dog or something. They're tracking a deer they shot over there. Now, do you just say, hey, that's fine, no problem? Or do you overreact and that's a real big issue, you know what I mean? I had cattle get loose one time that went onto somebody's property. He said, I'll shoot you if you go on my property. So everybody, all the neighbors around hate the guy, right? So you don't want to be that guy. So by all means, you want to be nice with your neighbors, probably not overreact. That's a good risk management protocol so that people actually might look out for your property. Unless you have something on there that's really dangerous that can't be on. I typically don't overreact. So somebody says, hey, I was just tracking a deer I shot on my property. I go, hey, I'm here. Looking for your lost dog, not a problem. Okay? So, you find kids out there running around, they see you, they run from you. You got to see how good a shape you are in and chase them, see if you can catch them. That's just part of it, I got it, so I'll do that, So here's another issue that we had happen here in Livingston County. I sit on our Farm Bureau Board of Directors, and we had a problem years ago with animal control. Okay? So, and I didn't realize this. I thought animal control is part of the Sheriff's Department. It's part of the Health Department. And what animal control was doing was, what were they doing? They'd I told you when people get a complaint, they take the complaint side, right? So animal control was showing up to people's houses, just their farms, just walking all over their property while they're gone. Do they have a justification just to come on your property? No. And we actually called the director of animal control in front of the board because we were getting so many complaints. If you see something from the road, if they see something like a crime, they have a right to go check. But you go snoop around your property because somebody called. And this happens with people who have animals. I've had it happen to me. Somebody drives by, says, no water out there. Well, they have no idea where the water is for that animal, but they just make it up, okay? So animal control should not be allowed on your property because generally they are not trained animal scientists. When they start, here's a big problem you have. You have a cow, right? It gets old, doesn't produce anymore. You send it to the auction. What do you do with an old companion animal like a horse? 30-year-old horse, can't barely chew, you're feeding it mash every day to keep it going. It's old and skinny, right? Those people, if that horse is by the road, always are getting the animal control call. All the time, okay? They're just trying to keep that animal alive. But don't let animal control on your property. Once they write a ticket, it's a problem. And what we found is that this is where it's important to know your neighbors. What we found in this county anyways, one of the good things about living in Livingston County is that you have pretty good interaction with your local officials, okay? And the farmers that have the biggest problem with the law are the ones that are pretty isolated, don't know a lot of people from the community. The people that know maybe somebody, they know maybe the prosecutor, they know the sheriff, they know neighbors come to defend them. We're seeing that the best luck that these people are that are doing, like, say, raw milk enterprises. We just had a big farm raid in southwestern Michigan. A group of two sisters that were selling, farm-made cheese, yogurt, things like that. They got raided and had to fill out, throw out like $100,000 worth of product. They were selling the product not locally, but more distributing it. Long ways away, they didn't have much of a support. The people that really are more ingrained in the community interacting are going to have a little bit more luck with these overzealous regulators, because animal control is not elected. That's not your sheriff. That's not your prosecutor. That's a official that's hired, right? Okay. And in Livingston County, they're big. We found out with animal control, their biggest thing is really cats, feral cats. They don't know much about livestock. So when they get called, somebody says livestock, we had some people get tickets because cows got out. One person got a ticket, their cow was out in their front yard. Yeah, and Michigan law protects you about cattle out, okay, by the way. There's a whole law on that, you're protected. And in fact, I knew a guy years ago, somebody hit his cow on the road, and they sued him. He ended up getting a lawyer, they looked at the law, he ended up getting paid. Because the person that hit the cow was at fault. So those are the, here's another, we had an issue in this county with PFAS, right? Jason Grostic over here was getting the biosolids dumped on his property from the Wixom water treatment. Okay, so the government, the USDA and MDA, encouraged farmers to take these biosolids. Well, then there was PFAS in the Huron River. They finally traced it to that chromium plating plant in Wixom. It wasn't long before they started saying, DEQ says, let's find these farms where the PFAS was field applied. They singled one farmer out, even though he was by no means the only farmer that used PFAS from that facility. With no specific guidelines on what the mandates were for allowable parts per million or parts per billion, whatever it is. And he voluntarily let state inspectors on his property test soil and groundwater and the cattle herd. Totally bankrupted him. Okay? He didn't have to do any of that, without a court order. So there's a case where he thought he was being a good citizen, maybe. I don't know exactly what he was thinking, but there you go. He voluntarily let him into test. Ruined his farm. Okay? And other farmers, I tell you right now, that PFAS from that facility is being applied on these other lands. I know other farmers that got the exact same product. They're allowed to still grow their product and sell it. It's going in the food system. Okay. Then I talked to somebody who works at Brighton Wastewater. Brighton, the same thing. All of them, all the public treatments, treat the sewage, put it into a biosolid, gets field applied. All of them had PFAS in their tanks. They had to do a big excavating process, clean those out. But this is where there was a subjectivity with government officials. Ruined the guy's life. Farm that's a centennial farm, I think. Been there forever. So now, there's a big movement, as I told you. There's an activism against agriculture, okay? So let's look at, I would like to say let's look at the facts, but, and they try to let's talk about why farms are criticized. A lot of it is let's just talk about carbon emissions. There's no facts in carbon emissions. It's based on modeling, okay, models. For example, that it affects climate in a negative way. However, now let's look at climate models going back the last 30, 40 years. not just wrong, but like 180 degrees wrong. They've never been accurate, always over exaggerated. But the EPA, if you go on their website, agriculture is a net in this country is a 10% producer of greenhouse gas emissions, okay? Every human produces about, I think it's what, 20 pounds of CO2 a year, okay? So this has just become an argument on who has the right to emit more carbon, that's all. That's, it's everybody who's producing them. If you're having kids, you're producing another, whatever. Nobody has the right to. So what they're saying, and animal agriculture is about 3% of overall U.S. Electricity generation, transportation is right around, putting those two together, 60+%. So agriculture is very low. And we're taking the blame because of a narrative. So we need to protect ourselves against that because it's coming. One of the ways they're starting to get us off the land is enticing you monetarily. So we have government initiatives. I don't know if it's part of that 2020 initiative or one of those, where there's billions of dollars earmarked for environmental improvement causes. This money, depending on what administration is in charge of the presidency, gets funneled to non-GOs, non-government organizations, which use that money to hire attorneys or groups or business ventures they see fit. So let's look at carbon credits. So right now, there's a lot of wanting to lease. There's companies that will lease your land and offer you a steady income if you manage land a certain way that will sequester carbon. It's believed and again, this is all hypothetical based on modeling, none of which really can accurately be proven at all and would vary completely depending on what climate within each state that you live in, which country. We'll pay you a carbon credit per acre of land that we'll lease. You sign a 50-year lease. You manage it. Now we tell you how to manage it, though. And that might be putting in a biomass crop like switchgrass. Keep it in perennial prairie grass for 50 years or so. Okay? But you're locked in, and you may not be getting, because it's all hypothetical, what they're doing is they're going mainly, you don't see a lot of it in Michigan yet, but they're going into farms like drought-stricken Texas, where ranchers have had to sell off their whole herd, where hay is prohibitively, winter feed is prohibitively, costly. And so they're going to where people are desperate, they're signing leases. And remember, a lot of these climate issues, localized climate issues, are temporary. You might have that 10 years of rain there, right? Okay? I mean, so that is a way to get you off your land, possibly, okay? It's a complete Ponzi scheme. It hasn't proven to be effective. And it's a way to help get farmers or landowners off their land. The other thing is government subsidized solar factories. Now this is getting a little bit closer at home. There's big movements here in Livingston County to put up not just hundreds of acres, but thousands of acres. They're not farms. Please don't use the word solar farm. They are a solar factory, okay? But it comes in with big, heavy incentives, okay? It's taking farmland out of production. Yes?
Aren't there some crops that can be grown in those areas?
No, not financially successful, okay? I've heard talk about grazing underneath them with sheep.
Right.
But most of these, okay, let's talk about this though. There's all these sideline enterprises you hear about. You're probably not going to make money on it. Okay? I mean, if you're, okay, who in Livingston County has sheep? Not many. You got 1,000 sheep to throw into a 1,000-acre solar farm to flash graze it in a week? No. And it's a solar farm. They have a lot of toxicity to them. I know a guy, Don Neville, has Neville Fence Supply up in Clear. He fences a lot of the big ones. Says there's broken panels, glass everywhere. I'm not going to run my livestock into the grass. Ruminants will lap that up with their tongue. They don't graze like horses. because they don't have the upper incisors, right? So they get in there, that gets into their, anybody heard of hardware disease in livestock? Yeah, you do not want to graze a solar farm. But that's one, it just wouldn't, the heat emitted at a solar farm, solar factory, you know, your microclimate is immense. Your temperature's going to be sky high. So you have a higher evapotranspiration rate. Where you do, I mean, let's say small berry crops or something. Yeah, it just isn't going to be practical. Can you get it? You'd have to get equipment in between the rows. I would guess it would be hard. Yeah. You've heard of that being done? Do you have it, like what type of crop?
I just had heard that that was what was being planned for one of the ones near Ann Arbor. And I was like.
It figures Ann Arbor would come up with it. Yeah, but it's not
Sounds
practical.
like utopia.
Yes.
This kind of is my area of expertise,
Yeah, okay.
right? So, I mean, they have had some success with grazing, particularly sheep. Cows are a problem. Grazing sheep between solar panels, particularly in Texas, they got herds of 10,000 sheep down there doing that, right? As far as growing crops between the solar panels, within the United States, that's still experimental. There's a lot of universities doing tests and things. They're doing some of it in Europe. I don't know how successfully, right? There's Europe, you know, well, all farm economy is distorted because there's always government programs, right? You know, they're doing some of it there, but it's not being really practiced here yet.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Are you a land planner or what are you involved in?
No, I'm involved in solar energy.
So, well, okay, here he goes, right here. So, probably doesn't like everything I'm saying about it.
Doesn't like anything you say.
You made a really good point about it raising the temperature. I've never heard that said before, but it would almost, I can't see how it would not be true, right? These panels are all jet black.
Well, just so everybody knows, you
20%
know,
of the sun's energy into electricity, the other 80% is heat.
you do know 98% of the U.S. surface temperature readings are corrupted, right?
Oh, yeah.
When you put up a weather monitoring station, there's guidelines. Distance from a parking lot, road, a building. There's people who've done studies on this, completely ignored by NOAA, okay? I mean, you see where, it's kind of an ad hoc system. They're set up all over the country at post offices and, you know, and you know, obviously at the National Weather Service offices, they're set up correctly probably. I haven't seen this. Anybody seen the one set up here at the county airport? I don't know. I think that one's probably set up accurately because when I check humidity and stuff, temperature's right pretty close to what I'm getting. But if they're like 10 degrees warmer and relative humidity is 10 or 15% lower, you're like, oh, they're next to a parking lot. Okay, all right.
They're usually set up right to begin with, but then they build a
Yes,
building next to it.
yes.
They pour another runway, they let it right, and then they throw it all off.
Well, and here's the thing, because they are all electronic now, a person doesn't walk out there to have to read it. They need it close enough to where they can run a cable. And a lot of times, because they were set up initially, but in parking lots, they have to tear up a parking lot to put a cable, they're not gonna do that. Yes?
I'm an amateur radio operator, and I have heard that NOAA and NWS also scrape there's a ham radio service, APRS, automatic packet relay system, and a lot of hams run wireless weather stations on that, and I've heard that the National Weather Service all of that data gets aggregated on a website eventually, and that NOAA also scrapes all of the weather stations that the hams are putting up. Like a lot of people have said, if you want more accurate weather reports in your area, put up one of these weather stations with your amateur radio license.
Yeah, you just don't know how good if they did. Michigan State University has MSU EnviroWeather. All theirs are set up correctly, and they're all cellular data. So they're out in it, usually at a farm, like an orchard around. There's participating members around the state that agree to have one of these weather stations on their farm. And those are set up, you could look at a picture of the weather station on their website. And it's actually cell phone data, so they don't need a cable. And it's set up correctly. So so where were we? So not just to mention, the solar, there's actual now a lot of eminent domain, right? Pipelines, we have, I know farmers in this county, that's a big issue, but the pipelines have an easement, okay? There is a national corridor that's gonna go through the central US to transmit the solar and wind energy from out west to the east coast. It's gonna be real wide corridors that are gonna, basically it's usurping you from your land. It's going to take food producing, here's the narrative. Farming is bad. Alternative, non-base load energy gathering materials like solar and wind is good. It's better to take these farmers off the land for this product. And that's the narrative, because the people in the cities all think that farming is just horrible, okay? Particularly if you're in the livestock, okay? Right? All right?
Eat the bugs.
Eat the bugs. Let's, the healthiest people in the world are the ones that eat whole foods, but all the people in the city eating the ultra-processed stuff, right, and vegetable oils they're the ones telling us that having livestock are bad, great, farm, and a lot of our, so that is the narrative. And that is a risk. So part of your risk preparedness would be being familiar with this stuff, forming alliances, get into your tribe, right? Like during COVID, a lot of us survived by being in our tribe, right? Okay? Like being around people we like, that are like members. So active participants in agriculture, production agriculture, is about 2% of the population. So, now does anybody here raise animals, grow fruit, vegetables? Anybody? Okay. I think I know you, don't I? You farm?
No, not commercially. I
Okay.
just have a few acres, I grow my own stuff.
Okay.
I have a question. So where is the corridor, from where to where is it going? How wide is it? Do you know?
There's multiple corridors. I forget the name of it. I just saw a video about it the other day. I was listening to it. And it's coming, some's coming from up through the Texas Panhandle, some comes from Southwest. I think a lot of it was in Kansas. And it varies in its width. Some of it's like hundreds of miles wide. Doesn't mean that there isn't going to be farming in there, but there's going to be, high tension power lines and through, it's already been passed. It's a long-standing initiative. Yeah.
And then my second question is, can you talk about the Right to Farm Act just a little bit?
Okay, so Right to Farm Act, good question. So prior to like the early 80s, you didn't have a well-established law in Michigan that protected farmers from frivolous civil litigation from individuals and cities. So everybody knows townships, counties, townships have ordinances, right? Local ordinances. And prior to that, they could just say, well, we're making an ordinance of no more farming in our township, okay? I knew a guy that had a horse farm. He had an issue where a neighbor didn't like his horses, didn't like the smell of his farm, sued him. This is right around the early 80s. The Right to Farm Act was just getting passed. And he went to it was Gordy Brooks. He told me the whole story. It was years ago. My buddy Eric I grew up with here knows him. And he had like multiple years of litigation, $30,000+ in legal fees. This is 40 years ago. Finally, the Right to Farm was enacted. He was in court. Somebody from Farm Bureau came in. The judge threw it out of court. But after all that cost was, saying, so now when I lease land, like I lease land in some suburban townships, even over in Oakland County, there will be on that deed, I get copies of some of the deeds, it'll say, you recognize you will be in areas of agricultural production which may have noises, dust, odors associated with standard agricultural practices. Something to that effect. So now we are protected with that right to farm. Now, there's clauses in there, like, right, as long as you are farming, right to farm has a thing called GAMS, Generally Accepted Agricultural Management Practices. And those are rules that as long as you're in those guidelines, then the regulatory agency, which would be the Michigan Department of Agriculture, which is called MDARD now, or DEQ, they can't, as long as you're in those regulatory guidelines, they cannot seek court action against you. Okay, and that's protected a lot of farmers, okay? So as long as you're farming already, and then a township might say no farms allowed, that Right to Farm Act protects you, okay? So that's what allows us to still be able to farm. A lot of complaints would be, like that's what protected me when this lady called the township and said he's putting in a 1,200 cow confined animal feeding operation, which was complete farce. I said, I'm farming, you have to prove I'm not, that I am doing that. I'm within I'm farming within the rights of the Right to Farm Act, I'm following GAMPs, and we never heard from her again, okay? But that Right to Farm Act is something you need to know, because it does have things about stocking density, manure disposal, protection of riparian zones, waterways, yes.
So Ken, if a village ordinance says no chickens, and you put chickens on your little couple acres, is that like?
No, the Right to Farm Act actually does not protect you for that, if there's already an ordinance against that. Okay, you have to be, there was a case here in Genoa Township, actually, and Frank Mancuso, I think, represented, I can't remember if he represented the township or the girl in the subdivision that had a rooster. So there was a case here in Livingston County that actually involved the Right to Farm Act. Yeah.
What about taxes? Doesn't that help keep it?
Yeah, so taxes, if you are farming and you have non-homestead property, one of the big things to protect you against overtaxation, which is mainly the schools, is to have your qualified agricultural exemption. That's why a lot of people lease land to me. If they have vacant land, they already have a homestead. So they're getting a homestead tax exemption. But you can't double dip. You can only have one homestead exemption. So you have non-residential, non-occupied property. It's taxed, I have some of it that's taxed light industrial or natural resources or whatever. But if it doesn't have to be zoned agriculture. But that's part of what the Right to Farm Act did. Is it allowed, if it's being farmed, that property has to be taxed as the agricultural land use, okay? And that's why people lease the land. Livingston County farm ground is not worth a lot of money for farming. It's not Saginaw Valley ground, it's not, Iowa 400 bushel, 300 bushel corn ground, okay? But I can't pay what the land is worth. I can't even pay the landowner's taxes, okay? Not what I'm making. But they save thousands, about 50% of their taxes leased it to me.
Does it make a difference then if it's residential versus agricultural land?
Nope, it's whatever the prior zoning was. Yep. A lot of land I farm is not agriculture. A lot of the townships on the east side of the county and western Oakland County do not even have an agricultural designation anymore. They have something called like rural residential ag or something, but that just means like a homestead on 10 acres with horses or something. No, it does not. Yeah, a lot of land's not agriculture anymore. Very little of it in this county is actually still zoned agriculture. Anybody have land that's agriculturally zoned? You got some?
I'm in Deerfield Township, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, 10 acres, just over
Yeah.
the,
Deerfield, Bright Tyrone, Cohocton, some of those townships still, Unadilla, those townships still have a good amount that they'll zone that way, but usually they want to get it into a higher tax bracket as soon as they can. So local officials, tax boards are generally going to get rid of agricultural taxation as quick as they can.
so someplace that helped me, I was putting a greenhouse in.
Yeah.
And still have to get, land use permission, all that. And I was just building it from a kit, building, it's not huge.
Yeah.
But, here's the prints, I'm building it exactly like this. And I took it to the building department, they were, no, we want you to do all this. And then we got talking, somehow they realized that I was on A. Oh, never mind, just do it.
Yeah, no permits necessary, no building permits for agricultural buildings.
I just had to say that I wasn't gonna have, outsiders into it, it was for my use, whatever.
Yeah.
And suddenly, it got easy.
Yeah. So we got just a few minutes left. Any other questions? Is there something I didn't cover? Any? Yeah, go ahead.
Why do you suppose everything you're kind of leading to about, the government and they're hard to deal with, and why it is that they're coming after farmers and stuff? Why do you suppose it is?
We're generally independent. When you, like I say, if you own a resource or have large resources, people want it. They can get it through socialized government power. A lot of times through sidestepping legalities of legislatures or local governments by going through civil means through the courts with lawyers, civil suits. That's why I meant the NGOs. There is the removal of the average person from the land that is really bought into a globally led world economic, World Health Organization initiative against agriculture. That farming, they've really done a good job flipping this around. Okay, so for example, my cattle are in completely non-tillable farm ground. I'm producing product with solar energy being gathered with low input cost by plants naturally doing photosynthesis, producing food for my cattle, a conception of plate business, and somehow they flip that around, that plowing a field, killing everything in sight, using herbicides, pesticides, fungicides to grow peas for pea protein, to make a pea burger is better for the planet and nature. They have flipped that around, and people are buying it. So it's because of bad news reporting. It's because of bad politicians. And we are losing the battle. We are not winning this. We are getting killed.
One further observation, he who owns the food owns the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that simple. That's why they don't want you to have little backyard victory gardens anymore.
Yeah.
The NGOs is what I keep seeing.
I don't know if I caught the last half of, who's the lady in here who was talking about all the different projects? So she covered, did you hear that one? Angela, she was covering all this. Because I was listening to her, I'm like, oh, I'm going to cover a little bit of that. About the usurpation of your resources, the non-obvious. But she went into all that, how city managers and planners of all the cities here in Michigan and townships have all had this type of training that really stemmed from World Economic Forum type initiatives on global planning and what is the optimal population in the world, things like that. Just remember, don't be afraid. I mean, we are hearing a lot of bunk based on models. Climate models, they're all wrong. I mean, almost like, I don't know, you might know one that's been sort of correct, but, if you're gonna tell me Hansen's 3 models that he did in the late 70s and one out of 3 got close to our normal where we're at, then forget it. But, yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. Anybody got an answer for that? Anybody? You said the food. Yeah, your answer pretty close. But it is bunk. Do not believe what you hear. There's a lot of aspects of parts of American agriculture which are junk, that aren't producing real food. But there's a lot of parts that are, yeah.
Do you have any opinion on heirloom seeds versus hybrids or things put out by like Monsanto?
Well, we have to allow, this is kind of a double standard. You have to allow farmers to adopt new technology. And this is a misunderstanding often. Hybrid seeds have been around they've been doing hybrid genetics they started that in Europe hundreds of years ago. And that is what produces our food. If you can't grow a hybrid tomato that is 100 times more productive than its wild counterpart, then you're not going to make a business. So I have an opinion that I'm indifferent on the Monsanto thing. That Monsanto did the Monsanto Papers, very similar to what Pfizer did. We have a lot of junk research, garbage research.
No.
Nutrition, if you talk to statisticians, nutrition and climate science are some of the worst design studies there are. They're almost not designed to even find the result they want. I had a professor in college once joke. He says, there's this curve here. He goes, well, we take the logarithm of the logarithm of the logarithm of that and get the straight line. And that's when we were just getting into statistics, and statistics were getting so complicated, most scientific researchers can't even understand them. They have a statistician that runs all their numbers that they consult with. So it's kind of the statisticians who are running the show. So a lot of science is junk. And nutrition and climate's the worst. But and that relates to what Monsanto did a lot of fraud there. And by putting out small seed companies, there's still a lot of those around, but we do not need, when they say that we're feeding the world, that's BS. Small farms can do everything that large farms are doing and better. We took what has happened now, our U.S. food policy, it's taken smaller farms have disappeared, it's taken people out of the landscape. You have far less farmers than what you did. I think I heard stats since 1990, we have 500,000 less cattle ranchers in the country. So no, we do not need large farms, especially commodity crops. We need more people growing non-commodity crops, like actual food you eat. Okay, so most stuff you're eating, you hear the statistic, it's everywhere on the news. 70% of the calories are from ultra-processed food. Most, I believe it or not, is manufactured seed oils. The manufactured food items are from the commodity crops. Grains. Refined grains are shelves. You could make byproducts out of them, make a shelf-stable, very cheap food, make a lot of money. If you're selling tomatoes or avocados, man, there's a lot of money in freight, perishable product, right?
Yep.
You'll make as much money. So health is a big issue too. Risk protection, manage your health. Don't listen to anything find alternative sources of health advice. Don't listen to a lot of the stuff you're hearing. Don't listen to American Dietetics Association. They're all paid for. PepsiCo Corporation funds them. Okay? Don't listen to any of that. Okay? So health is a big thing. I'm into that quite a bit. That's a risk management for me. All right, well, it's 4 o'clock. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.